At this Mass, we come to the high point of our Eucharistic Congress, our personal encounter with Jesus in the Holy Eucharist, receiving Him in Holy Communion. Sometimes, if we are not careful, our participation at Mass can become routine, just another thing to do in the course of the week. So to combat that danger of mere routine, it's worth asking ourselves the question, why do we go to Mass? Someone once told me why he went to Mass was not because he happened to like the priest, and he didn't go to Mass because of the homily, but he said he went to Mass for the Eucharist. He went to Mass to be fed by Jesus on His body and blood. So take a moment to ask yourself, why do you go to Mass? There are many reasons, of course, that we may give. Let me offer two possible answers at our Mass this evening. For one thing, you go to Mass because you need the Eucharist. You need Jesus. If you think you can live the Christian life without Jesus, you are mistaken. You're not really living. I am the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus says. A Catholic without the Eucharist will not remain a strong Catholic for long. A Catholic without the Eucharist will become worldly. One's faith will become watered down if he is not constantly being fed by Jesus. Pope Francis said recently, "It is sad to find watered-down Christians who seem like watered-down wine. One cannot tell whether they are Christian or worldly. Like watered-down wine, one cannot tell whether it is wine or water. This is sad." And the Pope went on to say, "It's sad to find Christians who are no longer the salt of the earth. And we know that when salt loses its taste, it is no longer good for anything. Their salt has lost its taste because they have delivered themselves up to the spirit of the world. That is, they have become worldly." You go to Mass because you need the Eucharist. You need what the Eucharist gives you, Jesus' real presence, to fortify you and strengthen you in staying united to Christ. You need the Eucharist. After all, why did Jesus give us the Eucharist? Jesus gave us the Eucharist because He wants the Eucharist to be a real part of our life, not just something we do once in a while. He wants the Eucharist to be an essential part of our life. He wants to live in us. He wants us to be holy, and we become holy when we are united to Jesus. And what better way to be united to Jesus than through the Eucharist, Jesus' real presence? That's one reason why you go to Mass, because you need Jesus, and you need what the Eucharist gives you, Jesus. Here's another reason to consider why you go to Mass. You go to Mass to be refreshed and to be made new. The theme of this Congress is, "Behold, I make all things new." You are also made new through the Eucharist. Jesus is always doing new things, lifting up those who have fallen down, forgiving sins and giving us a new start, healing the wounded, comforting the sorrowing, coming to help the weary and the heavily burdened. There is no limit to his ability to make all things new. And in the Eucharist, he lifts us up. He renews us. He fills us with his love. He refreshes us. He makes us new. There is that verse from the book of the prophet Ezekiel where God says, I give you a new heart and place a new spirit within you, taking from your bodies your stony hearts. What is that new heart and new spirit? That new heart and new spirit is Jesus. And that new heart and new spirit is constantly renewed in us through Holy Communion. Jesus feeds and nourishes the new heart and new spirit within us, keeping us refreshed in our Christian vocations. There is that verse from the gospel where Jesus tells us, I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you, so you also should love one another. In Holy Communion, the Holy Eucharist, Jesus comes to us to make it possible for us to live his new commandment, to love as he loves. In Holy Communion, he comes to live and act in us, making us new. Behold, I make all things new. Jesus makes all things new. And Jesus is calling us to make all things new, to bring the freshness and vitality of Christ to this old, tired world, to renew the face of the earth, to bring the light of Christ to the world. There is that verse from the psalm which says, Lord, send out your Spirit and renew the face of the earth. The Eucharist helps us renew the face of the earth because the Eucharist renews us and helps us then bring that fresh, new vision of Jesus' gospel to the world. Yes, brothers and sisters, you need the Holy Eucharist. You need the grace and power of the Eucharist in order for you to be made new and refreshed for your mission as Christian disciples. You can never afford to be without the Eucharist. Use the sacrament of reconciliation also, so you will always be prepared for a worthy reception of Jesus in Holy Communion. Jesus comes to us so humbly in the Eucharist, humbly hiding himself, his real presence, behind the appearances of bread and wine. Certainly, we can also humble ourselves by going to confession to prepare ourselves to receive Jesus in Holy Communion. Jesus says to each one of us at this Mass, behold, I make all things new. And you, my brothers and sisters, are also made new through the Eucharist.